What's up? Welcome to another episode of the ASKJV show. This week we are talking about automating your whole mix, how to create your own drum samples to use in your mixes, practicing balance, and controlling cymbal dynamics. Let's get into it.
3, 2, 1.
This is the ASKJV show.
Our first question comes from Reed. I've heard you and others say that they like to automate the volume of the entire mix up a little bit during choruses or any part that needs to hit a little louder. Where in the signal path does that automation happen? Does it mean hitting the 2-bus compressor on the master track a little harder?
Yeah, so I definitely do that sometimes. It's not something I do on every single mix by any means, but yeah, it's usually kind of the end stages of the mix. If I'm listening back and I just think, the verse needs to come down a bit or the chorus needs to hit a little harder, if you just come in louder, everything all together, then I'll automate the volume on the master fader a little bit. And I believe what you're asking is, that would bring everything up before it hits the mix bus compressor. So yeah, sometimes you're just hitting the compressor a little bit, which is cool because you can kind of push it and get a little bit more of aggressive sound just by turning it up, half a dB or a dB. So yeah, I definitely do that occasionally. It's not something I always do or have to do. 99% of my automation is just on the individual tracks or maybe the buses sometimes. But yeah, if I need a little extra towards the end of the mix, I'll throw it on the master fader.
Our next question comes from Toneshed. Could you maybe give some insight on how to create your own samples for blending in with the mic tracks, especially snare? I kind of prefer to use the drummer's snare for sample enhancement, but can't seem to get them to sound like the commercially available ones.
Yeah, cool question. I will walk you through how I made the samples that I use and that I sell on my website. Hopefully you can follow it. So usually if I notice the drums sound particularly good or it's a good drummer on a session, I'll get them to record sample hits of every drum. And then later on, I will go back to those hits and I will cut them all up, maybe 4 or 5 different multi-sampled hits for a rim shot, for example. And I'll actually export those just raw, unprocessed, and then make a trigger file out of that. Then go into a mix session, whether it's that band or a different one, and load up trigger and put those raw hits in there. And then I'll start processing the raw hits as they're triggering in the mix that I'm working on, if that makes sense. So I'll start throwing down EQ, compression, distortion, saturation, whatever I want to do. And then that way you can actually get a snare or kick or whatever sample you're working on that actually works in the context of a mix. And then I will go back to the raw samples that I took, go back to that session, import the settings that I got in the mix I was working on, and then print or process the raw samples with all the processing on them, and then export those again and make a new trigger file that's all processed and everything. So that's how I go about it. Because I used to try to just process the single hits, just listening to them on their own, and I would think it would sound like an awesome sample just on its own. Then I'd load it into a mix and it would just be horrible. So you've got to actually process it within the context of a mix to know how much you actually need to do to it. And often it's a lot. Like the samples that I'm selling on my site, for example, they're heavily processed. But that's the great thing about using samples is that you can get away with adding tons of EQ and compression and whatnot without having to deal with the bleed and everything. So there's my tip for that. That's my workflow for creating samples. Hopefully that helps.
What is the best way you have found to practice getting your balances right? Are there any special techniques or advice that you have besides listening to a bunch of records for reference?
I don't know if I have any better advice than that. It's not something that you can really teach, I find. It's kind of just your instinct of what you feel the balance should be of, drums versus guitar and bass and vocals. Kind of just comes down to your instinct and your feel. So I don't know, I guess I could say compare other things in the genre. So for example, a Foo Fighters style rock band, they're going to have louder guitars, whereas a really technical metal band is going to have louder drums. It's just kind of, there's norms for the genre, and it kind of depends on what the band's going for. So you can kind of gauge it by that, ask what kind of bands the artist is influenced by and what kind of records they like the sound of, and at least reference with those. And like you said, just listen to a bunch of great mixes, and it's kind of something that just gets subconsciously in your head, I feel like, after listening to tons of music and doing lots of mixing too, and realizing, what tendency you have. Like some mixers tend to mix the guitars a little too loud. That was definitely me. Some mixers tend to mix the drums a little too loud, and you kind of learn to know what your tendency is and compensate for that a little bit over time too. But it's kind of just instinct, man. You just gotta listen to stuff like you said, and then just do what feels right for you.
Our last question comes from Barney. The drummer in my band uses an electronic kit to trigger samples in Easy Drummer 2. The problem is he rides on the crash a lot and hits it just as loud as, say, at the end of the fills. This makes a swish over everything that gets in the way of other stuff. How do you think I can make the cymbals stand out during accented parts and not be too loud when he's riding on it?
Hey Barney, well, you've got two pretty simple options. I would say if you're recording the MIDI from Easy Drummer, then you could just simply go in after the fact and turn down the velocity of the hits on the MIDI track. Or if you're just getting the audio track from Easy Drummer and recording that, then you can just automate in the mix. So just ride the fader of the overhead track, and then when he's riding it during those big open sections, just automate it down a bit. And then when he's hitting the crashes on the accent beats, just automate it up. That's what I do for even real drums too, and programmed drums in the mix. Always automating cymbals and overheads and everything really, but that's a really effective way to accomplish what you're talking about there. All right, awesome questions, guys. Again, as usual, if you've got something you want to know, make sure you go to askjvpod.com, submit your question. And if you're not on my email list already, click the link below this video if you're on YouTube, or go to hardcoremusicstudio.com. Right at the top, you'll see the free mixing cheat sheet. That's just a free resource I put together. It's just a one-page chart that's going to show you different EQ points and compression points, starting points that you can use for every track in your mix, just so you don't have that experience where you pull something up and you know it needs to be processed in some way, but you just don't know where to start. So that cheat sheet is going to help you with that. And I send all my best content through the mailing list, so make sure you jump on that. Aside from that, please spread the word about the podcast. Leave a review on iTunes if you listen to the podcast on the go. Submit your questions, and I will see you on the next episode.